Hello, my name is Gail Hecmanczuk. Welcome to my presentation, More Trees, Please. I am a master gardener in Pierce County, Washington. This PowerPoint presentation was my intern project in 2022 when I completed the academic program. The Master Gardener program in my state is an extension program of Washington State University. Go Cougs. This presentation is available locally as a face-to-face talk, as are other really great garden talks through request of the Pierce County Master Gardener website. I'm recording it here for those who are not able to attend a presentation in person. There were many resources I used to educate myself and prepare my presentation. I want to acknowledge two of them up front. One of them is this organization, SUGI Project. SUGI is a 501c3 organization whose mission is to empower individuals to invest in nature and restore biodiversity by planting forests. This organization fundraises to support the establishment of community foresting projects around the globe. Sugi gave me permission to use their pictures and to tell a few of their stories in order to advocate for the use of the Miyawaki Method, which Sugi promotes in its work. In addition to Sugi, I want to acknowledge this book, which was another primary inspiration for my talk. It is called The Mini Forest Revolution, Using the Miyawaki Method to Rapidly Rewild the World. It was written by author Hannah Lewis and published by Chelsea Green in 2022. Along with my presentation will be a handout where you can find the details and links to many of the resources that I've used, and I would encourage you to explore that handout and explore those resources. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I want to take you back to a past experience where you were surrounded by nature. Okay, go there. You are cocooned by the natural world. Think about the smell of that experience. Remember the fresh air. Remember the sounds or absence of sound. Perhaps there's birdsong or insect noise. Remember the feeling of cool, damp air on your face. Maybe there is a wild animal nearby. Maybe several animals. Maybe there are fish splashing in the water. Do you feel a little more peaceful? Are you perhaps in a forest? Maybe you are someplace like this. This is the Tongass National Forest. It is old growth virgin forest in coastal Alaska. It is a truly special, beautiful place that you should visit with an indigenous guide if you ever have the opportunity. So, spending time in a forest has real wellness benefits. In a forest, it is likely that you would feel noticeably better and experience a sense of calm or ease. Maybe you would even notice optimal blood pressure. Dr. Quing Lee, a medical doctor and researcher, has studied the phenomenon and found that spending time in a forest can reduce stress, reduce anxiety, reduce depression, and reduce anger. It can strengthen the immune system, improve cardiovascular and metabolic health, and boost overall well-being. In Japan, they have a practice called forest bathing, which involves going into the forest with conscious appreciation for just being there and experiencing the forest. All right, having reminded you of the serenity and benefits of the forest, my goal with this presentation is to advocate for something a little different. This idea of a mini or tiny forest that can be grown on degraded and derelict parcels of urban land in our densest cities. As I prepared my presentation, I determined a second goal, which is to advocate for conservation of our existing urban forests, specifically within my community. So let's cover a little background here. In my state, the Master Gardener program seeks to address, by providing unbiased research-based education, 9 priority issues that face Washington residents. So here are the 9 priorities for us. They're all interconnected. These program priorities describe what we Master Gardeners do and why we do it. These priorities help connect the dots from the horticulture we learn in the classroom to the natural resources we volunteers are trained to protect. And this presentation about the mini forest will touch on 6 of these priorities. Briefly, they are climate change. Plant biodiversity will be a big topic. It's very important to establishing a Miyawaki forest. Nearby nature. Soil health is another really important topic for establishing a mini forest. Water conservation and local food are two potential results from establishing a Miyawaki mini forest. Okay, a little more background. This is the Master Gardener's mission. And let me just address what we Master Gardeners do. The home gardener has traditionally accessed Master Gardeners as a resource to understand the microclimate in their garden, even, and that microclimate in an effort often to determine the best tree to plant, how to plant that tree, and how to care for that tree as it grows. Master gardeners in my county also connect the public to community resources that can help source and help pay for the best tree for their home gardens. The Master Gardener program engages with community partners in community programs and community building. And trees are critical to community building beyond the home garden. We all need public spaces with trees. Communities globally are expending resources to promote community forest projects, all the while using volunteers like Master Gardeners to build community and social structure. This presentation will introduce you to the Miyawaki methodology for how to approach such a project. As I read the Hannah Lewis book about the Miyawaki Method and prepared my lecture, it occurred to me that planting a successful forest employs fundamental good gardening practices. So who better to promote this knowledge than a master gardener? Okay, so what is this Miyawaki Method? I want to introduce you to Dr. Akira Miyawaki. He was a Japanese botanist and expert in plant ecology. He was the recipient of the 2006 Blue Planet Prize. This prize recognizes outstanding efforts in scientific research or applications of science that contribute to solving global environmental problems. It is an international recognition. I think of it similar to a Nobel Prize, but for work in the field of environmental and climate change studies. One of Dr. Miyawaki's earliest academic pursuits that I wanted to share with you one of the earliest academic pursuits was the study of weeds. I thought it so appropriate that an expert on weeds would inspire the world to plant forest on degraded urban land. He was an outspoken advocate for restoration of natural forests using the concept of potential natural vegetation. This concept asks the question, so what would grow in an area if there was no human management or climatic disturbance? And I think we gardeners would answer, well, of course, native plants suited to the particular microclimate that complement the plant and animal diversity of the area. During his lifetime, he demonstrated the Miyawaki Method in projects worldwide. The forest projects Professor Miyawaki planted and consulted on were often on very degraded land and in a variety of microclimates and harsh conditions. The one example I wanted to share with you is that Professor Miyawaki was involved in planting forests along the coast of Japan after the earthquake and tsunami that devastated that country in 2011. The natural coastal areas suffered far less impact than the areas with built structures that had been erected to protect the inland areas. It's my understanding that after the tsunami, Japan determined to replace the man-built structures with forests where it could. The thinking is that the forest will provide better protection in the future than the man-made structures and concrete barriers that failed in 2011. And since Professor Miyawaki's initial work to establish a method for rapid reforestation anywhere, the use of his methodology has been applied and demonstrated to work in these many tiny urban sites. And the last thing I wanted to share is another important academic pursuit of Professor Miyawaki's was surveying and saving seeds for tree species that were disappearing from nature. This effort was critical in some of the urban forest projects undertaken. And so he was one of these heirloom seed savers before that was a cool thing to do. And the last thing to share about this slide is this picture of Professor Miyawaki that I chose to share with you. There are many out there online that you can find, but I chose this one because it was taken at a planting festival day in Madison, Indiana, at an Arvin Sango manufacturing facility in 2014. So Japanese auto companies, I think Subaru and Toyota, for example, and auto parts companies have a practice of planting forests at their industrial manufacturing facilities around the globe. This effort of auto companies has been a factor in spreading use of the Miyawaki method globally. And that brings me to another individual I want to introduce you to. So, second only to Japan, it seems to me anyway, India has the most experience creating mini forests using the Miyawaki method. The efforts of auto companies, and here particularly Toyota, to plant the Miyawaki method forest introduced this individual to Professor Miyawaki and to the Miyawaki method. This is Shubhendu Sharma, an industrial engineer from India. Mr. Sharma has used his industrial engineering training to start a company that consults on planting these mini forests. His company is called A-Forest. It now has a professional staff that consults on Miyawaki method forest projects throughout India and internationally. In my handout, I'm giving you links to two of Mr. Sharma's TED Talks, which have been instrumental in spreading the word on the Miyawaki method. There are a variety of other YouTube videos that you can find online that explain various aspects of the concepts behind the Miyawaki method. This is a picture I chose from one of his YouTube videos. It's just a screen capture. And I chose this because I think it demonstrates a couple of the important aspects of a Miyawaki forest. For example, this is a 2-year forest. It was planted 2 years ago, and it demonstrates this concept of planting very, very densely. So you can see all these layers of leaves here. And so all these layers are results in way more photosynthesis and more conversion of carbon dioxide into oxygen and carbon. Okay, so we have to deal with a little bit of vocabulary here to understand how to plant a forest, how forests grow. So what are pioneer species of plants and what are climactic species of plants? The term pioneer is used to describe the species that first colonized new habitats created by disturbance. So think after logging, development, forest fire, tsunami, or even a volcano. When Mount St. Helens in the Pacific Northwest, where I live, erupted, the very first species that arrived was lichen. Once the pioneer species arrive and start to colonize the area and start to build the soil, other species like grasses will come back. The complexity of the new plant community increases as more species arrive, including small shrubs, and eventually shade-intolerant pioneer trees. So these are our sun lovers. And but think about this: a forest is not a sunny place. A forest thrives in shade. It is after the sun-loving species are established that the shade-loving trees finally arrive and the forest can thrive. As time progresses, the soil becomes richer as leaves and vegetation decay, and eventually the area and the soil will support the climax species. So if you've ever visited an old growth forest, remember that the soil feels spongy beneath your feet. You wind up walking on beautiful, fragrant humus, which is necessary to support the climax forest. So if Mother Nature is left to reestablish vegetation through natural vegetation succession, it will take 100 to 200 years to produce the climax forest. And I think the next question you might be having is, okay, 100 to 200 years, that's quite a difference. It's quite a span. What's up with that? And think about it this way. Establishing this forest is basically a function of the latitude of the site. How hot does it get? How much sunlight does it get? Is there a dormant period? How much rain? So, for example, someplace like Borneo that sits closer to the equator, which has no dormant season, which has plenty of sunlight and lots of heat, will establish its climax forest much quicker than someplace like the Pacific Northwest, which is in a temperate climate, has a dormant period of winter, and receives far less heat and sun. We do get a lot of rain here, so that might mean the forest here will reestablish much quicker than in a drier climate at a similar latitude. Okay, so how is the Miyawaki method different from natural vegetation succession? The Miyawaki method establishes the climactic forest much quicker by doing two things. So here we're going to have our climax forest or quasi-natural climax forest in 15 to 40 years by doing two things importantly upfront. So at this point, we're going to fix the soil through human manipulation. So we're gonna have that beautiful organic soil, and we're going to make it on day one before planting. And then the other important thing is that on day one, we're going to plant all of our climax species. So everything we want to grow here, we're going to plant on this day. And it's kind of important to point out that these plants, so we're planting tiny little saplings, they will start to shade each other out quicker. And so that's how we can establish this shady forest and skip this whole idea of the pioneer sunny plants coming in to support the shady plants. And we will plant some uh, sun-loving plants at that point as well, but we're going to plant everything on day one. And the beauty of this method is for 3 years, we need some sort of human management. So we're going to have to worry about irrigation and weeding primarily. But after that point, the forest should establish and be successful on its own. So from this point forward, we're not going to be involved in working in this forest. So that's the Miyawaki method for you. My next two slides are the most technical, and this is sort of the how to do this. So stick with me, and then we'll get to some really inspirational examples and pictures and stories. All right. So planning what and how to plant a Miyawaki forest. Principles, sort of first step. Select native plants ideal to the growing conditions of the microclimate. The first question is, what is the potential natural vegetation for the area or site? And you can also think of it as, okay, this is that whole idea of planting the right plant in the right place. In many projects, the ideal climax species may not be obvious. In degraded areas, the ideal climax plants may have been removed centuries before. And this is where Professor Miyawaki's efforts to identify, collect, and catalog ancient seeds was so necessary and valuable. In Japan, the land had often been manipulated by humans for so long that ancient art and ancient texts and poems even provided clues as to which native climax species are most suitable in a site. Another resource used to identify the appropriate and often rare species was the nearest Shinto shrine. These shrines are traditionally left undisturbed through the years. Many Japanese would be surprised that the conifer forests common in Japan are not native. They were introduced to generate timber resources. Through his research, Professor Miyawaki determined that deciduous trees, which were quite often very rare in an area, were usually the best climax species to plant in the Japanese sites. For many early Miyawaki projects in Japan and India, the need for nursery space to propagate unavailable species was a necessary step in the Miyawaki process. And let me just point out that in deciding what to plant, it is important to consider just practical things like the slope, wind, rain, drainage, or even the proximity to roads or buildings. So you wouldn't plant a species that thrives on a hillside by a lowland river, even if these areas are side by side. Planting beside roadways should not impede visibility, so you might have some safety issues to consider as well. And I think this part of planning the what and how is really a fun activity for a gardener or a botanist or naturalist even. So the next principle is to plant with maximum biodiversity. The rule of thumb here is 70 to 80% of saplings should be canopy and subcanopy species, 10% shrubs, and the remaining 10 to 20% mid-sized plants. The key species should be the climax species. There should be as many different species as possible. Experience has shown that the more species, the better. This is not a tree farm with a monoforest of one species planted in row upon row. The something that's a little bit controversial is whether it's okay to consider the impact of climate change when planning what and how to plant in a Miyawaki forest. So this forest is going to establish over the next 15 to 40 years, and the climate may be a bit different in that period of time. And it's generally considered okay to include some plants that thrive to your south in a slightly warmer climatic zone. So you can include those. You would stick with the natives that are ideally suited to your site traditionally, but it is okay to consider planting and include in your planting the some trees that thrive in a slightly warmer climatic zone. Okay, so plant with maximum diversity. The next step in deciding what and how is to plant very, very densely. So I would refer you back to the picture I shared with Mr. Sharma and how dense that 2-year forest was that he was standing in the middle of. The rule of thumb is to plant 3 trees per square meter or 3 trees per square yard. By densely planting a very biodiverse array of native species, such forests encourage collaboration between the plants, fungal, and microbial life in the soil. It results in fast-growing forests with high survival rates. The dense forest creates self-sustaining ecosystems after the initial few years following planting. The dense planting is 30 times denser than a typical park or garden area and would provide 30 times the photosynthesis of carbon dioxide into carbon and oxygen. And the last principle here is to consider the potential for the animals to return. The older of Miyawaki forests, so these are the examples in Japan and India, which have been using the method for longer, have shown that animal life returns to the healthy forested sites often quicker and in more biodiversity of species than expected. The Miyawaki method has been used to create animal corridors for species of animals, promoting their genetic diversity and resulting in healthier animal populations. So the example I want to share here is the story of India's tigers. So by establishing the animal corridors, tigers are doing better in India because they're able to get out and mingle and move from park to park and conservation area to conservation area and preserve to preserve and back and forth. And this is creating more genetically diverse, healthy tigers that are doing better. So the question here when deciding what and how to plant is what is the potential pollinators in that area that we want to encourage to return, that we want to help, and that might need our help, because we are going to leave this forest undisturbed from human interaction, and we may be able to really promote our pollinators and wildlife. Okay, so this is sort of the planning, the dreaming part, the really fun, creative aspect to a Miyawaki project. My next slide is more about the hard slog and okay, so selecting, preparing, and maintaining the site. Site selection is a community decision. These are generally public projects and not a private home gardener project, although there is potential if you have the space for a homeowner to plant a Miyawaki mini forest. Anyway, Hannah Lewis's book shares some of the back and forth she experienced with municipal decision makers in her community. The site could be a school or a park or abutting a particularly unpleasant roadway. In many instances, Miyawaki mini forests have been established for the purpose of creating a buffer between noisy, dirty transport links or industrial sites on the one side and residential and community gathering areas on the other. So think train tracks, highways, factories, or a port on one side of the forest and residential schools and parks on the other. These buffer forests reduce noise and also lower particulate pollution, making the air healthier to breathe. So, regarding site selection, Miyawaki projects in Paris are replacing pavement in an effort to address the heat island problem that Paris is experiencing due to climate change. Paris has established an objective that no resident should be more than a 7-minute walk from a cooling island, and they are using the Miyawaki mini forest to meet that goal. Selected sites often provide degraded conditions and compact soils. So think about ripping up pavement. The soil under that pavement is really not going to be healthy. So that brings us to the next step, site preparation. Unless it is a very tiny site, preparation usually involves the use of a backhoe. The backhoe can also be used to address particular drainage issues. For example, the site may be built or bermed up to improve drainage or taken down to promote water retention in the forest with something called swales. And that's really the reason why I'm showing you this picture. This is a Sugi project in Beirut, Lebanon, I believe. And you can see it looks like they're establishing levels here. You can tell they're turning the dirt. They're actually doing more than just turning the dirt, but they're trying to get some oxygen in here, and they're trying to get water retention established so that the water doesn't just all run off with the rainfall and the irrigation. So the idea that that we need to improve the soil. We need to do some soil analysis. The question of whether the soil is clay, loam, or sandy must be answered and addressed. The Miyawaki method prescribes use of the ribbon method to analyze the soil. And it may need to be amended for drainage, also for nutrients. We're going to be adding some good organic matter no matter what. At the end of my slide, or end of my presentation, I'm providing a slide that's a good illustration, a good visual of this ribbon method for those who are not familiar with it. So we're going to analyze the soil, and then we're going to amend it, of course. I mean, this is gardening 101, right? Heavy compost is recommended. The Miyawaki method instructs you to use the readily available compost. So whatever is available and easy to get in your area. So for example, in my town, my city is Tacoma, Washington, and we have something called Tagro. It's a biosolid that's readily available. It's free. You might have to pay a little bit for delivery, but it is a biosolid. So it comes from our waste, our solid waste treatment. And it's a good option. It would be the obvious choice here. It is something that we gardeners in Tacoma really appreciate. It's good stuff. So the soil needs to be amended and compost, and then we're going to plant, and then we need mulch. And again, and mulch is really, really important because this is what's going to keep out any sort of invasives from moving in and impacting our forests. So the rule again is to use whatever is readily and available and traditional in the area. So it could be that in your neck of the woods, it's pine straw or just straw. You might have access to park refuse, so leaf mulch or chopped up branches that are available. Here we have a lot of access to bark mulch, arborist bark, so that would probably be our choice here. And so mulch, and then depending on local requirements, once the forest is planted, weeding and irrigation is necessary for no more than 3 years. And I would say if you plan your forest and plant right before the rainy season, it would probably be less than 3 years. So planting, weeding, and irrigation are often volunteer activities that bring the community together in shared efforts. So let me refer you back to the picture I shared of Professor Miyawaki at a planting festival day. So it was a big community event. They had a feast afterwards, and got kids involved, and turned it in to a real community affair, which creates a sense of ownership and pride in the new forest. So for some projects, municipalities or local parks departments take on the responsibility for irrigation because they have water trucks and can make quick work. But for many projects, the idea of weeding and additional mulching is like a plant a it's an opportunity to get together and to have work parties and get to know other members of your community that you might not encounter otherwise. So that's the hard slog. I'm going to share one more slide that is just sort of a summary of takeaways, I'm calling it. So I would really like for you to spread the word on the Miyawaki methodology. And if someone asks you, well, what was this lecture that you watched, and why is it important? What is this all about? This is how you might answer. You might tell them that the Miyawaki method of afforestation allows for the rapid creation of pockets of forest, even on degraded urban land. So something that can be done in any city. It is quick to establish and practically maintenance free once established, so for no more than 3 years. It utilizes 100% natural and organic methods. It is 30 times denser than other planting methods. It results in 100 times more biodiversity than nearby areas, and it is proven in Japan and around the globe with a 97% success rate for tree survival. Okay, so if that doesn't convince you right there, I have some just beautiful pictures to share, great examples and stories about many of these projects worldwide. So here we go. Here's the first project that I'm sharing. This is an aforest project. So Mr. Sharma or his associates were somewhat involved in consulting or planting this project in a park in Pakistan. So this mini forest project was planted in 2015 to address the heat island effect, the heat island problem in this very crowded area of a big urban city. So, and this is 2 years later. So this is planting day, and this is 2 years later, and the change is dramatic. And if you Google Maps this park now, which I did, you will see that the entire park is now greened up. You can't even see this little initial forest because they have planted the entire park and greened the entire space. So let me talk a little bit about this urban heat island problem, which a lot of people are familiar with. We do hear about it in the news all the time, but for people who are not informed about it, the the fact is that many of our urban areas are much noticeably warmer due to human activities. I think we can all have experiences of our own where we're downtown or at a shopping area, and there's just heat radiating. So think pavement, big buildings, and industrial activities. These areas, this urban heat island, is usually drier due to human manipulation of water drainage as well. Okay, so this is a real problem. It's a health problem for the people that live and live in these types of areas or are in these types of areas for work or whatever. So through study and data collection, it has been determined that these urban heat islands, these UHIs, are as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in air temperature and 20 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in surface temperature than nearby green space with tree canopy, such as parks. They heat up faster and cool down slower than nearby green space. And the solution to make these areas more livable is to plant trees, or even better, to plant a dense mini forest. So think back to my example of Paris choosing to rip up pavement in order to create a cooling center. That is what's at the heart of the problem in Paris and what was going on here in Karachi. So there's that example. I'm definitely tagging this as climate change and nearby nature because it's going to give people, individuals, the opportunity to get out and experience a little green in their cities. All right, so my next example is the Netherlands. The Dutch have become another leader in promoting the Miyawaki Method in many forests throughout the country. So Hannah Lewis's book shares that forest makers in the Netherlands struggled to get the go-ahead for their first Miyawaki forest. So it seems like the first projects where the municipal decision makers are involved, there's a lot of give and take, and it can be a bit of a struggle to establish and get the first projects going. But experience has shown, at least in the Netherlands, that once you get that first example that demonstrated, it will just take off. So in the Netherlands, communities are now jumping in. It's becoming a bit of a competition, I think, over who can do it better and best. And in 6 years, this Dutch organization, IVN, right? Let's see, let me get my cursor there. Where is it? IVN. So after it got going, within 6 years, this Dutch organization planted 111 mini forests. And now they've essentially written the handbook right here that you can see, which is, you have to request it, but they will send it to you and you can download it in multiple languages and free of charge. So what I've got here is the cover for the English version of their handbook that I downloaded. And IVN's organization is now consulting on Miyawaki forest projects across Europe. So a couple of things. Why did the Netherlands choose this? So I'm calling this one climate change and nearby nature as well. But it's my understanding that in addition to the urban heat island problem, the Dutch efforts have also been motivated in part to address the ever-present flood risk, which is only increasing with climate change. So planting the right trees in your forest will actually take up water and can mitigate flooding in an area. The effort is also largely directed to give school children the opportunity to experience nature in a very densely populated country with few places to experience nature. So here we're giving kids the chance to plant a forest and then watch it grow over the next period of time. And so that's why I chose this picture. Let me talk a little bit about this one. I chose to share this one because I think it demonstrates, some of the principles of a Miyawaki forest. For one, you can see how densely planted this little forest is. It's just like a 1 or 2 year forest. I also like that you can see behind. This is a transit area, so there's like an elevated track, light rail or train track here, and you can see they've ripped up pavement to basically make this a cooling center for anybody waiting for to use the transit links here. The other thing I like about this example is that you can see how you can start small and expand. So in this site, more pavement could be ripped up, more trees could be planted. So it gets you going, and then you can expand the effort. So let me go to my next example. That's the Netherlands. And this is my favorite one. And this is a water restoration story. And as I said, this is my favorite one. So this picture is one of 5 Miyawaki Method mini forest patches. They're calling them their pocket forest, which were planted as a coordinated project in Buea, Cameroon. Okay, right here. And this is on planting day of 2020. So what happened in Buea, a great influx of population in the 1980s resulted in cutting down the local forests in order to provide timber for housing. Although this area of Cameroon gets a lot of rain and mountain runoff, it is within the Congo River Basin. The loss of forest caused the water catchment to dry up. Though the area is blessed with abundant water resources, local inhabitants had faced a serious water crisis for a generation. They had to haul in water for human use for part of the year for the drier seasons. So let me point out a few things. This is fixing the soil. I think they're bringing some organic matter to compost. It looks like they are building some berms, maybe some swales to hold the water back as water conservation. It looks like their trees are here. They're bringing their trees in, and just a lot of effort is going into all the preparation on planting day to get ready for planting the forest. Okay, let me point out another couple of things. This bridge right here, and this little structure. Um, so remember that. And then let me also point out this little stream, this little uh, water flowing. It really doesn't look so great. It doesn't look that healthy and clear and clean, and the flow looks rather weak. Okay, so that is planting day. My next picture is exactly 1 year later. So, and let me prove to you that there's the bridge. There's that concrete structure right there. The water is the flow looks much better. The water looks cleaner. It's kind of hard to tell, but just the improvement is dramatic. And as you can see, the diversity of the plants here, the biodiversity of the plants, how much they've grown. Of course, Cameroon is a warmer climate, so of course things are going to grow faster there. So as you can see, the natural springs are coming back and are storing water. While the effort is ongoing, the desired results are happening much quicker than anticipated. This community did not have the resources for an engineering hydrology study, which might have been a first step, but they decided to go for it, and their hopes paid off, and the water crisis has been averted. The Buea Forest is the brainchild of one determined leader, this young woman, Limbi Blessing Tata, who attended an 8-month leadership institute in India, where her primary goal was to explore the development of educational opportunities for the girls in her community. And this is where she learned about the Miyawaki Method and realized the potential it offered at home. The Buea forest patches were planted with the additional goal of restoring fruits, nuts, mushrooms, spices, firewood, and traditional medicinal resources that had been lost with the deforestation. It is hoped that opportunity for traditional work associated with gleaning will return. And that's why I'm calling this local food and water conservation stories. I recently read about what's going on there now and noted that the list of species that are returning to the site in greater quantity and more diversity than anticipated include birds, frogs, and crabs to this Miyawaki site. All right, so that's Buea, my favorite example. And also, this is a Sugi project. And that brings me to my next example, which is much closer to home for me and with a master gardener connection. And that is this forest, this healing forest. This forest is planted in the shape of a medicine wheel. So here, it is at the Correctional and Rehabilitation Facility of the Yakama Nation, and they're calling it a healing forest for various reasons. So this medicine wheel is a traditional Native American design associated with health and healing. So this, it is a human rehabilitative project, as many of the many forest projects are at heart. This forest serves as an outdoor classroom where tribal elders can teach traditional skills and about native plants and their Yakama names and traditional tribal uses for the plants. The impetus to establish the Miyawaki Method Healing Garden at the correctional facility here came at the recommendation of Deborah Bird, a tribal member and master gardener who works as a dietitian for the Yakama tribe. Deborah Bird has also planted a mini forest in her own backyard, and in both of these forests, they have planted along the outer edges the sacred roots that disappeared with the nearby forest. She will use the sacred native roots in her work, specifically with diabetes. She also plans to use the forest to teach youth in her community about the native tribal and food traditions. So let me point out a few things here about this picture. You can see this is one of these projects that's planted in phases. So phase one, phase two, and looks like planting day of phase three. You can see all these individuals. It's my understanding that the labor to prep the site and prepare it and plant also, I believe, came from the residents of the correctional facility. And this, I think, demonstrates this idea of it being a function of where on earth you're planting your forest, because this is in the northern latitude. This is not too far from where I live on the other side of the mountains, in a more temperate climate. And so you can tell things are not growing in nearly as fast as Karachi or Bawea. And that's essentially why, and also drier than where I live. But this is establishing, you can see the vast difference between this year and this year. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. And I also thought, because this example is closer to my home, the question of what to plant is relevant and interesting for us in the Pacific Northwest. This forest matrix here included 36 total species in 4 ascending layers. So shrub, subtree, tree, and canopy. Some examples include once common trees and shrubs to the habitat zone for the selected site, as well as black cottonwood, scholar willow, trembling aspen, wild rose, buffalo berry, native blackberries, camas, and huckleberry. Medicinal herbs planted on the outer areas of the forest include stinging nettles for pain relief, which, is interesting. When I mentioned this to someone, they said, well, you obviously wouldn't plant those where the kids are going to be, because they do sting. It is a painful experience, and you wouldn't want to give kids a bad experience in establishing your forest. But it also includes tree moss for overall health, huckleberry leaves to settle the stomach, pine needle tea for digestive health, and yarrow for wound healing. And camas, they're planting camas, which we have in Western Washington as a prairie plant, really. And it's an amazing plant. And that's what this picture is, camas, that among other benefits, has very, very low or zero, I believe, glycemic index. So its bulbs can be harvested after 7 years, which is quite a while, and made into a flour that can be used to make breads and pastas and things with zero glycemic index. That would be really great for anybody dealing with diabetes. So it's not commercially grown or anything, but this is just a really amazing, cool plant that I've recently learned about. Let me share pictures of some of these others. The native huckleberry, that's the willows, the scholar willow, the quaking aspen. These are the pine needles that they make a tea for digestive health. And here are the stinging nettles, which we have in Western Washington as well. So there you have it. Very interesting project for us in the Pacific Northwest. And let me say one thing about the Pacific Northwest versus over there in Yakima territory. I think we get a lot more rain. So I believe we would have things growing back a bit faster into our forests than Yakima. Just not, I don't have any scientific proof for that, but it's just my best inclination is that it would grow and the forest would establish quicker in the Pacific Northwest than over in Central Washington. Okay, so one last example that I want to share, which I would call this also a healing project, and this is another Sugi. The Yakima one is a Sugi sponsored project, as is this one, various projects in Beirut. These projects have addressed water purification and overall healing for these forest makers dealing with a lot of loss and hardship. So, in Hannah Wynn's book, she talks about these projects in Beirut, and they were ongoing when that city had the really horrific explosion that just the port blew up and devastated the city. And focusing on these forests has been a real healing activity for these forest makers, in addition to water purification and other great reasons to establish these forests. These Sugi pictures illustrate two questions you may have. How small are the saplings to be planted? And so here, these are the saplings. They're tiny little plants, and you can see how densely they're being planted here. This is a planting day, and you can see they're using their kiddos to get out there and do the planting. You can see, I think here their mulches. It looks like maybe straw bales, which I think is uh, also what you could see in the Yakima pictures as well. And so that answers the question of how small are these saplings that we're planting. The other question you might have is how tiny can these mini forests be? And I like this example to demonstrate that. The forest, the Miyawaki forest, pictured here is a small strip along a busy roadway in front of an urban power station that they refer to as the power plant of death because of the pollution emitting from the chimney. So it must be burning coal or oil. And for this reason, this forest is considered an air filter, as well as a buffer and so forth. One thing I learned about this tiny forest is that they did find it challenging to irrigate this area and did have to do some replanting of the trees, but try again. They've managed to make it work there. Okay, so that is Beirut, also a Sugi sponsored project, as I said. And that's really the last uh, beautiful example I have to share, the last really great pictures. So let me just say that I selected this topic because I think it's important for our master gardener and the larger community to know about the Miyawaki Method forests and these projects that span the globe. But my exploration of many forests led me to reach out locally, and I learned some things that I want to share with you. So my next slide. My next slide is a picture of the tree canopy in my town, in my city of Tacoma. Our local Tacoma tree canopy goal, our goal is 30% by 2030, and we're currently below 20%. This is really low relative to our peer cities in Washington State. So we're called the Evergreen State for a reason. And our tree canopy in Tacoma is below 20%. So for reference, Seattle is at 28%, and I think Tacoma should be doing better than Seattle in every way. Paris is at 10% tree canopy, and then the inspiration is Tokyo. So the most populous city on earth is at 52% tree canopy. So it just goes to show what you can do and what you can accomplish when you make nearby nature and trees a priority. So one of the things I learned in my exploration last summer is that Tacoma has a professional tree staff of 3 people, and that comparable cities with similar size, so geographic area, and similar tree canopy goals have an average of 11. The other example for comparison's sake that I wanted to share is Washington, D.C. So I've been watching some urban online forestry webinars that are sponsored by the USDA and USFS, and one with a presenter from DC. So DC has a tree canopy that's the District of Columbia, has a tree canopy of 37% with a goal of 40% by 2032. And just to kind of highlight the challenge that Tacoma has in going from 20 to 30 in a matter of 7 years. In the last 5 years, with a staff of 24 urban foresters, DC was able to improve their canopy by a little more than 2%. So it does seem to be the sort of thing where we need to be supporting this effort as a community, and doing whatever we can to help our forestry people meet the goal, the very ambitious goal that they've set. Now, we do have a few challenges in Tacoma. So we do have this big I-5 corridor, and we do have a big port, but that just means more opportunity to improve the situation here. So let me just say, just briefly, hypothetically, it's probably a good thing to focus on keeping the trees we have. So if you have something called a mega warehouse proposal for your city, and that mega warehouse proposal will cover the space of 50 football fields and will pave over an aquifer, which is a secondary supply for water for your residents, with hypothetically your primary supply of water being snowmelt from the mountains, and this is your secondary supply, and you really want to retain that, you might think twice about this idea of a mega warehouse, especially if that land actually is um, land that will that feeds the Puget Sound and supports the life in the bay and in Puget Sound. So conservation. That's the thing that I came to a conclusion is so important in these urban areas like Tacoma. When I spoke with people in my community, I spoke with a carbon sequestration planner for my county, Pierce County, and learned that no real tree canopy goals for the county. We do have Mount St. Helens National Park and in our county, so it doesn't make sense to have a tree canopy goal. But my county, Pierce County, has in line with Washington State, has adopted the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030, and it's published in the Sustainability Plan 2030. And I'm giving you a link to that on my handout as well. This plan focuses on 5 areas to meet the goal. Carbon sequestration and educational outreach are 2 areas of focus listed in the plan. And it was interesting to me that the WSU Puyallup Extension, of which Master Gardeners is a part, is listed as a partner on many of the action items proposed in the plan. And an additional action item in the plan is conservation. So in my handout, I'm also providing a link to the Pierce County Sustainability Plan, but also to the Pierce Conservation Futures Program. This is a program I wasn't familiar with, but there's a process to identify and acquire land that should be conserved. So maybe this land that, is proposed for a mega warehouse, if hypothetically there was such a thing in your community, there is an established application process by the Pierce Conservation Futures Program, which is designed according to a 2-year cycle. There's a matching requirement. So 10% of the funds to acquire the land is independently funded. So you could think of something like a GoFundMe or a land trust with some significant resources. And then the county would contribute the other 90% with the obligation that the land be held in trust by an agency such as the Municipal Parks Organization. So maybe this is something our metro parks could become involved in, or an established land trust. I was also told there is an emergency process to facilitate the protection of land where there's more urgency to acquiring the land. So this is a real possibility that I want people in my community to know about. So that brings me to my next slide. I'm hoping that you take from this presentation that you want to become better informed. And here I would just suggest that you check out the resources I'm providing, explore on your own, and read Hannah Lewis's book, for example, and especially go in and explore the Sugi Project's website, because it will make you feel hopeful and good about these projects. They're very inspirational. So become better informed, share your knowledge with friends and neighbors. So tell your parents, tell your children about this, tell your coworkers and your associates about the Miyawaki Method. The more people who know about this, I think the more likely it is to take hold here in our neck of the woods. Then contact your city, county, and tribal council members to advocate for Miyawaki projects in your community. I know in Tacoma and other communities in Pierce County sit on ancestral lands of ancient tribes. And here, Tacoma specifically, the Puyallup people. I would personally like to make a connection with the Puyallup tribe to share the Miyawaki Method with them. So that's something that I'm going to pursue in my future in this regard of what can you do. Explore local opportunities to connect with urban foresting. In Tacoma, we have the Tacoma Tree Foundation. They sponsor tree walks and work parties with a couple of other organizations. And they give away trees, and the city of Tacoma actually has a nursery that grows trees that are given away in an effort to increase our tree canopy. Now, that said, I think that's wonderful, wonderful activity, and but I think preserving our trees, whatever we can do to preserve our trees and any local forested areas, undeveloped local forested areas, is another. So local opportunities to advocate for those types of things as well. So plant a forest if you have the space. Not too many of us do, but I personally live on a major arterial in Tacoma, and out near the street, I have a plot of land that's given me fits, and I'm going to explore going out there and planting very densely native plants. And some of the benefits I expect from this endeavor is, number one, noise. Be a noise buffer from the busy road. That it will clean the air, the particulate pollution coming off of the road, and also the idea of maintaining it for only 3 years is just, it makes a world of difference to me, because then after 3 years, I'm anticipating that I will not have to go down there and pull all the nasty blackberry. So anyway, that's something you can do if you have the space. Encourage conservation of existing forests. So whatever you can do in this regard, with just trying to figure it all out. I mean, I'd like to learn about more opportunities to conserve our green space in Tacoma. Okay, so that's all I really have for you. This is your homework. Please go out there and spread the word. Okay, so here's a picture of me. Let me share this. As you can tell by now, I am a tree hugger. I'm a nature nut. The interesting thing about this tree, about this picture, is that I am 26 meters up in the tree canopy, so about 75 feet high. So see how huge that tree is, 75 feet up in the air. I'm on a tree canopy walk. And in this forest, this is in Borneo on vacation. And, my husband took this picture from the other side of the canopy. So you can't even come to understand the scale of this tree, because he could only get so far away to take the picture. But anyway, that's why I'm sharing that picture. This is the links for if you want to connect with the Pierce County Master Gardener program at all. This is how you can reach us. So let me just say a few closing comments. With the dire climate crisis news we hear almost every day, I personally find it uplifting to know of hopeful, positive actions being taken around the globe to heal nature. And so I think I've asked the question, what can we do here to promote the urban forest? As one reviewer of Hannah Lewis's book stated, imagine a world where every modest scrap of worn out dirt or asphalt, think tennis court size, can become a cooling, moisture circulating, air cleansing, wildlife nurturing forest within a few years. Mini Forest Revolution, that's Hannah Lewis's book, shows how ordinary citizens can embrace this trial-ready solution and are doing so. So I hope I've given you some food for thought with this presentation and that you will share your thoughts with others to promote various efforts to plant and keep trees. Let people tell everybody you know about the Miyawaki Method. And I would just thank you for your attention. This slide are credits. I also have these in my handout so you can explore further. And then my last slide is this visual of the ribbon method. So this is to analyze how porous your soil is, basically. And the idea is you can do this with your kids. It's make a mud pie, squeeze that mud pie into a ribbon. If you're able to, so this is 75 millimeters, so 3 inches is what we're talking about here. If you're able to squeeze out a ribbon of close to 3 inches, you have your soil is clay, and the water will not drain, and you're prone to flooding is the idea here. If you're not able to squeeze out a ribbon at all, you have very loamy, sandy soil, and it will not retain the water. So, so you'll have to do much more irrigation. So the idea is that you amend with organic matter, and you want to get something in this range that will drain, but also retain the water in the soil. So, and of course, the way to do this is to add organic matter and to mulch with beautiful, gorgeous mulch that you might have available. And that's really all I have to share. This is, I'm calling this my soil health slide. And thank you again for your attention.